Metal Gear Survive stacks stiff, repetitive gameplay atop survival systems that are unforgiving and unrelenting, making the overall experience feel like trying to break out of a chokehold with one arm tied behind your back. While exploring the unknown in search of resources can be gratifying, it always feels like a desperate gasp of air before the fingers tighten again. The game is set shortly after the attack on Mother Base in Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. Your character is sent through a wormhole to Dite, a barren, drab-looking parallel world that's made up of recycled Metal Gear Solid 5 locales. There you're tasked with finding the cure to a parasite that has infected you, and also seeking out what has become of your comrades. Survive's story is mostly uninteresting, and its narrative beats are thinly veiled excuses to repeatedly send the player out on fetch quests or to activate machinery. Despite some small hooks into the greater Metal Gear canon, the story is largely forgettable, and keeps out of the way of the gameplay. Metal Gear Survive's exploration and resource gathering routine is dictated by hunger and thirst, which are an ever-present doomsday clock constantly counting down to your demise.
Thirst can lead to death. Please drink something immediately.
And they negatively impact every other gameplay opportunity Survive offers. Hunger and thirst deplete so quickly that micromanaging them becomes an all-consuming task. And because the economy of resource intake versus expenditure is weighted so heavily against you, the best course of action is often to limit engagement with exploration or combat. Take gathering for example. This is done by running around Dite in search of dilapidated buildings to pillage materials from. However, sprinting consumes stamina, and as you become more thirsty, the maximum amount of time you can sprint for lowers. It can be topped up by drinking water, but that's in short supply. So in the end, jogging is the smarter option. The result is that movement is joyless and exploration a chore, and this is compounded when you venture into Dust, an area of the map enveloped in a thick, poisonous miasma. The greatest rewards can be found in Dust, but an oxygen meter controls how long you can stay there for. Although the game's in-game currency, Kuban, can be used for an oxygen boost, you can only do this a few times before it becomes prohibitively expensive. Visibility is also reduced, and the map becomes unreliable, so it's easy to lose track of your objective. Because of all this, your time in Dust becomes brief, and your spoils often feel paltry. Survive's zombie-like wanderers are usually found in isolated numbers that are easy to pick off by simply running up behind them and using an insta-kill attack. Their movements are slow, and each one behaves exactly the same. Combat as a whole is similarly lacking in dynamism. Swinging a weapon and landing a hit feels satisfying, and range combat provides a little more freedom of movement, but overall it's more functional than fun. In order to actually craft new weapons and equipment, you need to find recipes for them in containers around Dust. There isn't a way of locating containers outside of randomly stumbling upon them, and it's a crapshoot as to what you'll get when you find one. If you find the recipe for a new weapon, you'll need to have the relevant materials to craft them. The more exciting stuff requires rarer materials, which are often hard to come by. If you really want or need an item, your only option is to keep going back to Dust for short stints in hopes of finding what you need. Survive does make exploration a little easier using wormhole transporters, which serve as fast travel points. However, powering these up for the first time draws waves of wanderers to your location to fight off. These moments are when Metal Gear Survive actually feels thrilling to play, and surprisingly it's because of the limitations of the game's systems that they are. Setting up before the ambush, you're acutely aware of how little you have to work with. Taking out enemies is tense, partly because of how inelegant movement and attacking feels. You need to be measured and precise to make each swing count, all the while keeping an eye on your vitals. It's a delicate balancing act in which the stress comes from knowing how much you've committed to the battle, and the tension is in how much you stand to lose. Base building is also a big part of Metal Gear Survive's gameplay, and there's enjoyment in spending time and resources transforming your ramshackle base into one outfitted with water tanks, areas to grow vegetables and rear livestock, cooking stations, and crafting benches. Growing your base is perhaps the most rewarding part of Metal Gear Survive, but the game barely explains mechanics such as resource sharing and creating exploration teams, and crafting and building involve navigating a litany of menus. You can also play Survive in online multiplayer, during which you team up with friends in wave-based survival missions. Equipment and items are shared between campaign and multiplayer, and this mode is considerably more generous about doling out materials and weapons as rewards. This is a good way of making things a little more manageable, but relying on a separate mode to make the campaign feel manageable feels like an obvious sign that the single player experience isn't balanced properly. For the most part, Metal Gear Survive feels oppressive, demanding and obtuse. It's a shame because there's actually a good survival game in there, but the pressures it places on you makes uncovering and enjoying that unappealing. Over time, the ability to balance thirst and hunger becomes slightly more manageable, especially if you play the multiplayer, but the lead up to that is debilitating. There's some satisfaction to be had by persevering and savouring the enjoyment of small victories, but you'll quickly find yourself thinking if your time would be better spent playing something else entirely.
I am going to make you suffer. Until you remember what pain is.